If there's one thing everyone can agree on in regards to Disney animation, it's that the villains more often than not are the true stars of the show. One thing we find interesting, however, is that while no two Disney villains ever act quite the same, more often than not, they go out in about the same way. Villains tend to die after their final defeat, usually by falling off a cliff, or it is heavily implied that they have died. Very rarely do they survive the events of the film, and it's even rarer that they are sent to prison for what they've done. But what if that was not the case? What if we took several of Disney's most classic films, looked at the various villains throughout them, and decided what sentencing they would most likely get? Get seated, because today we'll look at many of the villains from the Disney Renaissance, Disney's most prestigious era, and see which ones we'll be going easy on and which ones we'll be wishing they were so lucky. As this is the first ever video in this series, let's make a few things clear. For starters, this video is intended to be in good fun, and not totally indicative of what sentences these characters would get if they existed in the real world. Second, we'll be looking at 4 films from the Disney Renaissance for this video. They will be Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Pocahontas, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Oh, and lastly, for the sake of this topic, we'll pretend all these villains survived their stories so that they can stand trial. With all of that out of the way, the court is officially in session. First on the stand is the titular beast himself. Otherwise known as Prince Adam, a lot of you might be wondering why Beast is even on trial. He's one of the heroes, you might be thinking. To that, we have to say, is he? While the Beast does eventually regain his humanity, both in the spiritual and the literal sense, it's a long and painful process not just for him, but for Belle, who we can't just ignore was quite literally kidnapped and held hostage by him. That's already one crime Beast has committed, but we can also get him for extortion as well, since he essentially forces Belle into a life of servitude. Prince Adam is also likely to be hit with a charge of abuse, not just for his relationship with Belle, but also for how poorly he treated the people he ruled over.
If she doesn't eat with me, then she doesn't eat at all.
While we don't see this much in the movie, it is told to us that the prince wasn't exactly known for being a great leader. With all that in mind, Beast could very easily get a pretty hefty prison sentence. But we aren't so keen on that either. The person on whom he inflicted the majority of these crimes, Belle, saw the good in him and was instrumental in helping him become a better person. If this was a legitimate trial, Belle would probably agree with that assessment. As such, we believe it is in the best interest of everyone that the Beast be sentenced to a long period of community service. While Belle and the Beast have made up, he still hasn't repaired his relationship with his people who he treated so poorly while he reigned as prince. We think this sentencing would be a good way for him to give back to the community, and who knows? Maybe in due time, the rest of France will look at the Beast the same way Belle does. Going from a main character to one who only appears in stills, our next trial is that of the Enchantress. Though this character has no speaking lines, she has a big impact on the events of the film. It is the Enchantress who puts this spell on not just the Beast, but all of his royal servants as well. We must admit, we aren't really sure if magical spells are something you can be sent to prison for. So let's instead go with what you could argue this act was, which is assault. Her actions cause not just the prince to suffer, but also his servants, who have always seemed a lot more easygoing than the man they serve. It certainly isn't a kind act, but let's not act like the Enchantress was some sort of a wicked witch. Or is she? See, it's important to remember that this film takes place in France during the late 1700s. This is right in the middle of the witch hunts. So if she was to stand trial for her actions, it's safe to say she wouldn't get off easy. With that background in mind, we're giving the Enchantress our first death penalty. Her curse might have had an overall positive effect on the life of Beast and all those around him in the end, but being a woman who possessed real magical powers would almost surely lead to her being burned at the stake. Next up is someone who plays the part of a villain but isn't quite the villain. The head of the Asylum, we welcome Monsieur d'Arc. This character plays a bit part in the movie, but it nonetheless is an instrumental part of Gaston's plan.
So you want me to throw her father into the asylum unless she agrees to marry you?
In the movie, Gaston tells him to imprison Maurice in the asylum, so that Gaston's goal of marrying Belle can come to fruition. Monsieur knows that Maurice doesn't fit the type of patients his asylum takes on, but he agrees regardless. This means he's guilty of conspiring and corruption. It could also be argued that he is guilty of abuse, as asylums during this time in history were not exactly revered for treating patients well. In the case of one titled Asylum de Loons, we can assume it's even less caring. Not only does he abuse the patients he has, but he is all for locking up the innocent so long as he gets paid in the end. As a result, this is another foe we have to issue the death penalty to. In his case, he will likely die by hanging, as was standard at the time. However, there is a slight chance he could get off scot-free. Perhaps the argument could be made that Monsieur's old age has left him in a place where he's no longer fit to lead the asylum. Nevertheless, for his role in Gaston's plan, and especially his treatment of his patients, we think this is a pretty well-justified sentence. Gaston might be the real villain of Beauty and the Beast, but no villain is complete without a sidekick. In Gaston's case, he has Lefou. Lefou might not be the most physically imposing Disney villain, but he's just as dangerous as many of them, and we have the charges to prove it. The mob scene at the film's climax is where we see many of Lefou's criminal charges in action.
Ooh, they're back!
Not only does he break into the prince's mansion, not only does he aid pretty much every step of Gaston's plan, but he also tries to murder both the Beast and all the servants in the mansion. With all these acts in mind, we think it only makes sense for Lefou to serve 13 years in prison. While there's always the potential he could get out earlier, we don't think it's all too likely for this guy. 13 isn't really known for being a lucky number after all. We've now reached the real star of the show, Gaston. From the very beginning of the movie, Gaston makes it clear that he is not a trustworthy individual. For one, his infatuation with Belle puts him right into both harassment and stalker territory.
I'm just full of surprises.
His plan of taking Maurice out of the picture so that Belle will have no choice but to marry him also makes him guilty of blackmail. Finally, as the film draws to a close, he incites a violent riot, breaks into the Beast's home, and attempts murder, which we touched on when putting Lefou to trial. With the most amount of crimes for any character in the entire movie, it should come as no surprise that we give Gaston 30 years in prison. Some may argue his punishment should be even harsher, but we think Gaston could play the courts in his favor to get a less harsh sentence. He's a charismatic guy, as proven by how much the people adore him. At the moment, however, a long time in prison fits with the crimes Gaston has committed. As the song goes, no one's slick as Gaston, no one's quick as Gaston, no one gets a jail sentence as bad as Gaston. We took a few creative liberties with the lyrics, okay? Moving on, it's time to discuss the next movie on the docket, Aladdin. The first of the movie's 3 villains we'll be looking at is Gazem. A very minor character in the film who died shortly after first appearing, Gazem is the criminal who Jafar tasked with stealing the lamp. This makes him a thief, but if you look deeper into his character, it is also mentioned that he has murdered in the past, making him one of the few Disney characters we've looked at to have done such a thing. For this alone, he gets a pretty hefty sentence. We sentence Gazem to 25 years in prison, as this is the average for most states in the US. However, things can always get worse for this thief, as some states would even enforce the death penalty on Gazem for murder. The sentence could also go up, but we choose to keep it at the average on account of the fact that it's never really discussed how many Gazem has murdered. Whatever the amount, it's going to be a long time before Gazem will be feeling the touch of the Arabian desert, if ever. Up next is everyone's favorite Gilbert Gottfried-voiced parrot, Iago. Jafar's pet is an accomplice to many of his crimes. These include theft, attempted murder, and biggest of all, conspiracy and treason. Don't forget, Jafar's whole goal in the Aladdin film was to gain ultimate power. He wanted the Sultan's throne to control Agrabah and went after the lamp to help him in this mission. Iago was complacent in all of that, and for that very reason, we have to give him a prison sentence of 16 years. However, we think he could definitely get pardoned at some point after his sentence begins. Although it's up for debate how much the direct-to-video Disney sequels are considered legitimate canon, the Aladdin sequels show Iago undergo an arc where he becomes a hero, even going so far as to defeat Jafar. Besides, how bad could prison really be for a parrot? While Iago might get let off easy, the same cannot be said for Jafar. Jafar is guilty of more or less every single crime Iago has committed. From treason to attempted murder, Jafar has done it all.
Make sure he's never found.
The difference is, while Iago was aiding in these crimes, Jafar was the mastermind behind each and every one of them. It was ultimately Jafar who tried to take the throne and seize power for himself, just like it was him who desired the power of the magic lamp. Iago is complacent, sure, but he is merely a tool used by Jafar to achieve what he wants. And with a crazy set of crimes like the ones Jafar has done, how could we not give Jafar the distinction of being the first villain to get a life sentence in prison? Jafar is a highly dangerous and deceitful individual. Who's to say he won't try an even more dangerous scheme if he's allowed to roam free? A life sentence doesn't just make sense on the account of all the crimes Jafar has committed, but it also makes sense in regards to what potential horrors he could unleash on the world. In a way, it could be argued that this is the exact punishment he receives in the actual movie, as he is trapped in the lamp with no hope of freedom for 10,000 years. Fitting, isn't it? Aladdin's out of the way. It's now time to discuss Pocahontas, Governor Ratcliffe. It shouldn't be a surprise that Ratcliffe has the most crimes of the two villains in this movie, but he might also outdo everyone on this list so far. When Ratcliffe and the settlers arrive at the New World, Ratcliffe quickly makes plans to wipe out all of the natives in the area.
Oh, those filthy heathens don't disrupt our mission.
With this act, which happens very early in the movie, comes the charge of attempted genocide. He also begins a war with the natives, not to rescue John Smith as he so claims, but so that they'll be wiped out and nobody will stand in the way of him and his gold. Ratcliffe even betrays Smith in his search for this non-existent gold. This makes him our first war criminal. Not the type of villain you see in a Disney movie often, right? While his charges aren't as numerous as some others, the severity of the crimes easily makes him a more evil villain than almost any of them. For these reasons, we have to give Governor Ratcliffe our very first death penalty. War crimes are never to be taken lightly, and even in the time of England in the 1600s, we don't think the courts would take too kindly to John Ratcliffe's actions, especially when they nearly led to the death of many English settlers. We see the governor being executed via firing squad, one likely made up of many who embarked on the New World journey alongside him. How's that for poetic justice? On a slightly lighter side, Ratcliffe's assistant, Wiggins, won't be seeing anywhere near the punishment he will. Wiggins serves Ratcliffe, and as such, follows him through a lot of his orders.
Ooh, gift basket.
Wiggins also plays a big part in Ratcliffe's plan to wipe out the natives, as he is the one who informs him that John Smith has been captured. However, he seems to sit out the conflict between the two sides and does not appear again until he actually helps the settlers load Ratcliffe onto a ship, showing that the assistant has had an apparent change of heart. This leaves us a bit torn. Wiggins does play a role in aiding and abetting Ratcliffe's war crimes, but he also does change for the better. Ultimately, we think Wiggins should serve 5 years in prison, but choose to pardon him. He's clearly changed for the better, and the settlers all welcome him with open arms. We've finally come to the last movie for today, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. There's only one villain in this movie, but in this case, we may have just saved the worst for last. Our final trial for the day, Judge Claude Frollo, now comes before the court. Really, what hasn't this guy done? In just the opening minutes of the movie, he murders a woman and nearly commits an act of infanticide. Though he takes on Quasimodo as his own, his relationship with him is incredibly abusive. Frollo's relationships with others are all horrible in their unique ways.
10 pieces of silver for the gypsy Esmeralda.
He harasses Esmeralda, burns down buildings, and very nearly destroys all of Paris. And this is just what's shown in the movie during a relatively brief portion of his life. He wants practically everyone who isn't perfect in his eyes to suffer. For all these reasons, we cannot imagine Frollo getting anything less than the death penalty. While many may argue some of our other verdicts, we think everyone will agree on this one. Frollo has spent an entire life torturing others and making lives miserable, but in the end, it may just be himself who suffers most of all. Hunchback of Notre Dame takes place during the Middle Ages, a time when this penalty was carried out through various ways of torture. He could be hung from the gallows, beheaded via guillotine, or boiled alive. Whatever the punishment, Frollo's last moments will undoubtedly be his most painful. But let us know in the comment section if you agree with our list. And tell us what we should cover next. Remember to hit that notification bell and binge more of our videos. But most importantly, stay wicked.